There it is. Okay, Sean, how you doing?
Hello, Anna. I'm fine, thank you. Lovely to speak to you.
Yes, and you. I just introduce you a little bit. So you got quite an interesting history actually, because you've got like 6 awards from the Costa Arts and Pierre Letters Essays Award. You're a writer, artist, and lecturer in art, culture theory, and justice reform. So that's quite a lot of stuff. That's a lot of interest going on there. So do you want to kind of tell me a bit about like certainly how you've kind of gone from like art, cultural theory, and justice reform? How does that all kind of fit in together?
Yeah, sure. I've been a writer since I was 14 years old, and songwriting adolescents do. And then I had my first sort of poem published in 1995 when I was 20, and then university art school for 6 years, and then living in Istanbul for 10 years. And each time you do one of these big life changes, you take on all those creative impulses. And I'm just a maker and like a sieve of various ideas. And what I enjoy doing is expressing them either visually or in writing or in music. And I do each of them to the equal sort of intensity.
Mhm.
So I can call myself an artist and a writer without being too self-conscious about it. And
Yeah.
so that's how I pulled all those things together. And over the last 6 years, I've become into justice reform by accident and also with the same kind of intensity that I do the other things.
Nice. Excellent. So Istanbul, what was that like? 10 years.
Right, yes, yes. I was there for 10 years from 2004 to 14. I went out there in the first place because I was very tired of to Tony Blair's Britain. It
Mhm.
wasn't going what I was enjoying just after the millennium. And after my master's, I was feeling a bit of postgraduate depression, I suppose. What shall
Okay.
I do? And I met somebody as well. So I went out to stay with her for a little while. She's an Armenian Turk, and so there's a whole Armenian history and all these things that I was able to explore in
Lovely.
Istanbul, which is the second biggest city in the world. So by judging by how you count, after Shanghai, I think,
Okay.
17
Wow.
million, 20 million. It's huge. Everyone thinks about it like being dust tracks and camels and things, but it's a massive metropolitan city. And I didn't know that until I got there. And spent 10 years there kind of teaching English and cultural studies and being in a band. And I recorded uh, the 4 albums whilst I was
Wow.
there too.
That's a lot of albums to do in 10 years, to be fair. Like,
Well,
Guns N' Roses took their sweet time between one of their albums and the next one, didn't they?
and I didn't even have their support, absolutely. But I was in the middle of a massive city, and it's easier to do these kind of things in that context, isn't it? So, you know.
Excellent. Okay. So after 2014, did you think, okay, right, it's time to just go back to the motherland, as it were?
Um, yes, I'd had enough of being there after 10 years. It's like, how am I going to work my way back to Britain
Mhm.
and operate on my own territory level? It's sort of, without wanting to sound patronizing to Turkey, which I have a deep love for,
Yeah.
is you want to test yourself on your own ground. So I was really having that itch. And helpfully, I was deported at the same time because the visa
Um,
had run out.
oh, okay.
So yeah, that came to the attention of the authorities, and they put me on a plane and sent me home. So it
Oh,
wasn't, yes, it wasn't entirely sort of perfect departure, but it wasn't too traumatic. It's just like, right,
yeah.
that's the end of an era, and
Yeah.
then came back to a place even more in culture war problems than Turkey was, which are massive. Here it was going off as well.
Crikey, so that's 2014. So you noticed, was there a difference like 2004 Britain to 2014 Britain?
Yeah, I guess so. People have become much more neurotic,
Okay.
um, because of all of the pushes and pulls people are being pulled through. Women
Mhm.
and men don't can't communicate in the same, so don't seem to be able to communicate in the same way that they used to.
Mhm.
All of the race stuff, which used to be Britain gets along, bubbling away with acceptance and treating people on an individual level, had
Mhm.
been tossed into the fire, and everyone was hating groups. Okay, spun by the media who are desperate to keep the things going because the internet's destroyed it, and that becomes spun out. And I watched all this happening in Istanbul, but they are much more focused on Islam versus secular than black versus white because they
Right.
don't have that culture going on there.
No.
So I was also able to intellectually compare and contrast all that kind of in the writing. So yeah, but there was a big difference, and I think I was a bit of a victim of that. I can't believe I used that term, but I'm a bit of a victim of that coming back, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it must have been a bit of certainly a culture shock to come back to that when I know what,
Yes.
what kind of things are happening now. I think, there's a bit of the uproar. Brexit was on the horizon, things like that. It's certainly, from what I remember, it was quite the catalyst for labeling people with, like as a racist and things like that. That certainly started to become more prominent. Even I noticed I was, gosh, how old was I? Can't remember now, in 2014.
Back then,
yeah, back then, and I was a lot more left leaning then, so I was a bit like, oh yeah, is everyone just a racist now? Like, that walked into, I feel like it kind of got to that point looking back. So tell me, so you're involved with the Empowering the Innocent project, and a part of that is the False Allegations Watch, is that right, or have I got it the wrong way around?
Completely right. Yes.
Right.
I'm
okay.
Yeah, a bit of a backstory there is that I'm the editor of False Allegations Watch, which is a part of Empowering the Innocent, which is an umbrella organisation operated by Dr. Michael Norton, who is the UK's miscarriages of justice expert, really. Lots of books on it, and it's got a big name in that area. Because in 2016, after coming back from Istanbul, I'd set up a arts centre and music venue on the south coast. And in the December of that year, I was the subject of high kind of Me Too allegations myself,
right,
sexual assault. Yeah. Okay. So I then went through an 14-month kind of process of kind of waiting on bail and the massive stress that involves at the time when everybody's freaking out on that subject anyway because of Harvey Weinstein, etc. And eventually the court case came. I didn't speak in there because of my stammer, and I was advised not to by the barrister who denies he said that, and it didn't go my way. So I went to prison for a couple of years, and in prison I was able to read Dr. Norton's book, Good Claims of Innocence there. And I was going, right, that's me. I wrote a letter which didn't reach him. I wrote another letter which didn't reach him. Kind of wrote one to his co-author, didn't reach her. I'm like, I didn't know this until after you get out, because prison communications are so terrible. But after I did get out, about a year ago, I contacted him. We made good friends, and he asked me, because of my writing background, you would be perfect to be editor of this project of mine, False Allegations Watch.
Okay.
And since then, I've done maybe 100 articles of kind of my own and other people's that I edit. And it's not all about sex allegations. There's murder, there's fraud, there's all kinds of things where the courts have gone wrong.
Right. Okay.
Evidence.
So yeah, that's a heck of a thing to go through. So let's go back to kind of like the beginning. So you've had this allegation made against you. Were you brought in by the police for interviews? Was that something where you invited in, or did they come to get you?
It was a couple of days before Christmas, and the context is I'd had a one-night stand with a friend who was also a kind of customer and staff at the venue, who's a little bit younger than me, but not, she's adult. And the boyfriend then reported me the next day. So the boyfriend was trying to join the police, and what they did to give this some gravity and to be totally disclosing to your viewers is that 6 months before there had been this other allegation of a kiss by another boyfriend of somebody else. So which didn't got to no further action at the time. They'd ignored it. They brought this and added it to this one because that's what Alison Saunders, the then director of public prosecutions, did, bundling. So they bundled these two together to make a different case, but there was no evidence for anything. A bit of CCTV of us getting close. They tried to construct a spiking narrative, which I didn't know until afterwards, after I got out. I was furious about this, and there's no evidence for that whatsoever, because it's a disgusting thing that I would never do. I need to do anything like that. And so that was abandoned, but they operated on the basis that was a fact, and got the bad character in court, and that's how they got like 8 witnesses to something that didn't happen. And the one witness I had decided not to speak mysteriously. So, did that answer the question you asked? I forget.
Yeah. So it's just like, I take it did they bring you into the police station, or did you go there voluntary?
Oh well, kind of the morning afterwards, the evening afterwards, they came to the venue up the stairs and they arrested me. So
Right.
and so yeah, you just have to go down the station, and I went down the station. They didn't handcuff me because I'm polite and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. And I spent the night in the cells there.
Okay.
Yeah, and was interviewed.
Okay. So was it quite a lengthy interview?
Yeah, the interview probably take about an hour to hour and a half of asking repeated questions, and I
Right.
answered them because I didn't want to go no further action, because no comment, because
Yes. Yes, of course.
that's not me. I prefer to always tell the truth. I'm a truth teller.
Okay. So going through the process then after, so you were released, was that on bail?
Yes, yes. Then yeah, for 14 months, and the trial was put off twice. So you get this letter through, every 6 months. You're sort of, what's happening to this case? Then they got 2 postponements. Maybe it was 3, but it was a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay. So during that time, presuming that we've got a alleged victim, alleged perpetrator, would you say that, because obviously, well, I can only assume here, where you went in contact with this lady, that was kind of, you wouldn't see her unless you went to court, is that right?
Yeah, it's a part of the conditions that you don't have any contact with the accuser. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would this period go under the Ministry of Justice at this point, from the police under the Ministry of Justice, or would it be both? Is it? So I'm not sure.
It's a very good question, and I don't know the answer you
Okay. No worries.
entirely sure. I imagine the whole thing's under the MOJ and very
Okay.
much the Crown Prosecution Service, but what's happening is that the CPS are kind of waiting. They're analysing everything, and they've got a million of these, so they're doing all that, and the police are sort of, they've just given it to them, and they're waiting to be told that it's going to be actioned. So
Right.
after 6 months, I was brought in by the police to say that the CPS will charge you, which I was
Okay.
utterly surprised about.
Yeah. So it's quite a long time, like over a year, to be kind of
Yeah.
sat in that between, the arrest and in the court. What kind of interactions did you have with the MOJ in that time, or the Crown Prosecution Services, the police? What were they asking things of you? Was there any, investigation in that time?
There was a couple of letters that came. There was the no further action for a part of the allegation. So they have these things in different parts. So there was a no further action. But then I was talking to my lawyer, who was legal aid situation then, because the venue had been closed, and I was out of money. So that had all gone stinkingly wrong,
Yeah.
So that was all going on, and everyone was saying, you need to get a lawyer, you need to get a lawyer. I'm like, why? There's no evidence, and nothing's going to happen. But the solicitor did say to me, you don't need evidence to convict in these cases anymore. I'm like, what? Well, whatever, it still didn't happen. So I'm not going to, there's no problem.
So
Anyway.
so you were advised by a solicitor that in a case of sexual assault, no evidence would be required. So would that come under circumstantial evidence? Word, he said, she said kind of rule. Is that an accurate way to put it?
Well, you've got to the nub of something very current. Dr. Norton's just written an article about the inversion of the presumption of innocence over the last 20 years. This comes to that. The Believe the Victims policy, brought in by Keir Starmer in 2009-10, basically directs, not necessarily by law, but as a part of the 2003 Criminal Justice Bill, that you don't need evidence. You don't need so it's like circumstantial. The account of the complainant is evidence, and of course, not speaking means that I didn't give my own. But they did have the transcript, which I said just use the transcript that I said at the time. But it was the investigating officer kind of actually sort of reading what I'd said. This hostile person reading my words. So that's how the principle of innocence till proven guilt has been got rid of. The lawyer did say that, but she almost said it in order to freak me out. That's how it felt anyway. It was like totally, eh?
Mm.
So, well, I'm not going to get charged anyway, but I'm just an optimistic thinker, and obviously
Yeah.
too optimistic. So, but when there's no evidence, you just don't imagine to go down, do you? Or
Well, no,
it's,
not really. And as far as I'm aware, the justice system is kind of like innocent until proven guilty, no matter how infuriating that may be. Because there are videos of people committing crimes out there, and you still have to wait until that date. And so I can understand that, where it's just like, well, we can see this person's done this crime, but you just have to wait until the official court date and to get the conviction. But when there's no
there's
evidence,
two sides. It's complicated. I realize
yeah,
that.
so that's complicated. So let's go back to your experience then. So how would you say the treatment of the police was towards you? What were their attitudes towards you?
It was ambivalent. So it's the whole impression given is oh, here's another one, and that didn't mean here's another wrong one. It just means here's another case of this, without very anything particularly special. They're just kind of watching to see if you're going to kick off, and
Right.
that's not happening with me. So like, I was polite, and you just go through this kind of a series of ticking boxes, but at the same time you're going, shit's got very strange all of a sudden, and I don't really know why. And the police know that, and there's also this pressure of them, which is temporary, because you can't go through what they've done to me and to many others and still be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Not me anyway. It's like if you're going to enact the worst punishment that the country can give, then you're going to get someone probably who just is not as scared anymore, and that has been the sort of net result of all this. But people, obviously, it's a difficult story because it could happen to anybody.
Yeah.
But the police in my thing weren't in any way sort of brutal or bad or anything, but it was just all very tick boxy, and a couple of them were giving me the eye as in, go, we have to do having to do all this all the time. So, but that's just their humanity coming out more than. I don't want to speak about the investigating officer and people like that.
No.
Part of other, but the specifics are tricky. But the general,
the institutions, how they treated you, generally speaking. Would you say, could you characterize them as being quite objective throughout their processes? Fact finding, perhaps, maybe another way to put it.
Well, what's going on is that, and what actually happened to me is that it's a process of case building, and anything that goes in the favor of the defendant, being me, is unhelpful. So what has been seen by lots of appeals that have worked, but not many of these appeals have worked, but the ones that do, is that they're exposed for just case building as opposed to fact finding, which the police are supposed to do. The police are supposed to analyze everything and go, well, this happened, he said, she said, indeed. And the problem is that the power feminists, who are now, and I'm very sorry to use that term, but it's a fact, in charge of the justice system, have tried to break that process apart so that the case building's okay, all men are potential kind of rapists or whatever, and to get rid of the necessity for evidence. They're going for the juryless trials now in England, and for the complainant not having to hand over anything from their phones and things like this, just in order to further sort of demonize insufficiently risk-averse men, or normal, just interactions between men and women, in order to push society further apart.
Okay. So you did mention name earlier, so I can't remember at the time, not Keir Starmer, the woman who was in charge at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know a bit about her background? Was she a vocal feminist, would you say?
Alison Saunders is
Alison Saunders, that's the one.
Was the name of the DPP there. She's now, after being deposed by herself before she got pushed in 2017 for non-disclosure in the William Allen case, where there were 40,000 texts which exonerated him but were hidden. They weren't known about. So they're like, this young man was about to go to prison for 12 years for a rape where it was clearly not that. And so that was exposed, and she had to step down. And now for the last 4 years, she's gone to another big firm in kind of in London, Linklaters they're called, and so she's working for them still as a brief, still
Okay.
doing her work. So and she's got her pension, all the rest of it, for £1 million. So the fact that she almost put Liam Allen in prison, and the thing with false allegations watching Empowering the Innocent, what I would actually like is every case that's contested under Keir Starmer and her after, so over about 10 years, is opened again and looked at. And that would actually be justice being done. But because the system doesn't actually work retroactively very well at all, it's unlikely to happen. But the right thing to do, if you take off your power feminist specs, is to do this. And to come to conflict resolution, because these things aren't all about being right and wrong or good and bad. They're about misunderstandings. So I've got a plan to present sexual kind of excuse my stammer, sexual misadventure, sexual misadventure as a new category in the sexual assault sort of spectrum, which would be no fault. But we'll see what the power femmes think about that, because it's the human reality as opposed to the getting the men banged away thing that they want, because there'll be 1 million people in prison if they get what they want.
I think I can imagine there's probably going to be a bit more than that.
Right. Well,
not in a funny laugh way, a humorless laugh there, may I say.
Well, it's true. It's true.
Quite interesting that you said about like taking the power feminist specs off. So just listening to what we've spoken about and thinking about it, would you say that these institutions have become ideologically captured?
Let me think for that for about 2 seconds. Yes, they absolutely have.
Okay, and, that wasn't even 2 seconds.
I'm talking to the person who doesn't need pussyfooting around a subject like this, where you know exactly what an institution being ideologically captured is like, and with what the power femmes have done in the same way as the trans activists, not the trans people, the trans activists have spanned their way into positions of power. They know how to operate the levers, and they're operating them very cleverly. And they've been trained, just the trans, but definitely the power femmes, in the gender studies classes for 30 years about how to get into power and to change from inside there. Learned by Tony Blair, from Mr. Tony Blair, of get in there and then do the changes. They've operated that. And he's a power feminist himself. This is not a sexualized thing. Keir Starmer, Tony Blair, Jack Straw, these people are feminists too. So and which would be absolutely fine. I'm an equality feminist, by the way. Dr. Norton is as well. It's but that means equality. It doesn't mean the demonization of men, which is now actually moved to. So you find yourself, talking like I do now. I'm going to be chucked into the far right misogynist bin, though actually that's not working anymore with people like me either, because everyone's recognizing centrism, or just, I wasn't bothered about politics before. I'm a cultural guy, not political guy. But they forced us into this. They forced lots of academics into this. Not sure where you were, but no, it's fine.
So you were put in prison after being convicted of guilt. How long were you in prison for entirely?
I was in for 4.5 years, from
4.5 years,
2018 to last the summer of 2022.
Crikey, says that's quite fresh then, coming out, really.
Yeah, been out about a year now, but there are a couple of positives of prison, where it's a very disciplining place, obviously, where if you're a super creative like I am, you get loads of ideas, you scribble them down, and when I can go and actually enact them, I'm going to go and enact them. And they're all positive with a person like me. I don't have I'm going to get revenge or anything like that. It's not about revenge. It's about how am I going to use what I have to learn and to actually communicate what's going on in culture, because that's what I've got a master's in. That's what I do, And then, so if you put a person like that in prison as a prisoner maintaining innocence, this is the result you're going to get: a person that's speaking about it in a liberal democracy. Thank Lord.
Yes, that's if we really have one anymore, unfortunately.
Well,
in my own personal opinion, obviously it's not great. you know, and certainly like hearing your story, it does sound like, you know, that it's coming from all these different like ideological angles to get you. Now, I do remember speaking to you beforehand about wrongful conviction rate. So I just want to go into that a little bit, if that's okay. So wrongful conviction rates, was it about 1,400 per year? Is that right?
Yeah, kind of according to Max Hill, who's the director of public prosecutions now, and he's going to retire and he's going to move on in this November. He said a couple of years ago in a Telegraph article, I think 1,400 kind of wrongful convictions per year, which was picked up by Faction, the falsely accused carers and teachers org, and then repeated by the BBC. So this is a established number. I mean, it's obviously not exactly 1,400. It's about between 1,300 and 15, and a lot of these things are grey anyway. But beyond, if it's not beyond reasonable doubt, it's grey, and that's what people forget about the law. You know, and that's what these people are saying. There's something that's gone wrong. It's not even necessarily that it didn't happen. You know, perhaps the sex did happen, but there was, for example, sex. But because there's all kinds of things that people kind of sort of not guilty about. Where you have this special, because we've all become Puritans now, many have become very puritanical. They've forgotten that people do actually have sex lives that they don't talk about, and then they do. The power femmes and the rest of them depend on that in court. People think, oh God, I don't want to talk about that, especially when they're a bit religious. So the prisons are full of religious people.
Crikey. So is that just in relation that figure, is that applied just to sexual crimes?
No, it's to all crimes.
To all crimes,
it's to all, convictions rather. But the majority do happen to be sex because it's so grey itself, and it's so difficult to prosecute, and it's also easy to prosecute if you employ believe the victims, which is the reason they've done it.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal belief is just like both should be, you know, where like the alleged victim should have support. I don't think that's beyond anyone's, you know, comprehension really. But also the one who's being perpetrated shouldn't be treated like as guilty before proven innocent. You know, it should be innocent until proven guilty. Because otherwise justice would be obscured, obviously, in a case such as yourself. And I can imagine that the fact that these wrongful convictions tend to be sex related, because as you said, it is such a grey area, and there's quite a lot of, dare I say, misinformation around it. People don't know what it means, and that even I don't. You know, some people say these very obscure things like, a man looked at me funny, that was sexual assault, and you think, hang on a minute, is it? You know,
that's where we are.
You know, it's, you know, there seems to be a lack of clarity. Do you think that the justice system, the MOJ, is trying to do better in that regard to try and clarify what these definitions are?
Absolutely the opposite. They're this enormous spectrum of a hand on the knee in 1986 to the violent rape of Sarah Everard by Wayne Couzens, which is a terrible, terrible thing. And then halfway down, you get these Rolf Harris cases, and Mr. John Leslie exonerated twice, Alex Salmond, all these high-profile things, and Liam Allen stopped the system. But there's this kind of weird spectrum of everything, and we don't talk about it because it's too uncomfortable. People don't want to upset the women in their lives, which is basically being craven. So everyone needs to speak honestly about it. What happens online is if you talk about it, everyone thinks you're having a direct go at them, and they say, "Oh, sexually assaulted," and it's like, but it's not about you, and it's not about your case. That's obviously yours, but we can't talk about that here. We're talking about the entire principle of something having to be beyond reasonable doubt before you prosecute it.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier about the police. Are they operating in good faith, basically? And the fact is they're not, because they've been given the permission to look at the defendant as a perpetrator, as opposed to investigating properly. And they've been given, back in the day, back in my day, they were given incentives by conviction targets. So they'll be promoted if they get convictions. Well, if they get an exoneration, that should be considered a victory as well, surely. But it's not, because of people like Betsy Stanko, who's kind of one of the, that's a person I'm happy to name. She's She's an academic. She's an American academic who advises the Metropolitan Police and the University College London. And she's a radical feminist from way back. She's a very polite, calm, quiet woman. She's not like strident, but she knows how all the levers of power works, and she pushes them through, all of them. And she's got sort of surrounded by a bunch of Canadian pals now in the CCRC and the Criminal Cases Review Commission and the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. All of these bodies have a Canadian woman in there somewhere saying, well, actually, what you can do is, and then they take away another right. So it's a very slow.
Yeah, I do have a bit of a question. So Betsy, she's American or Canadian? Sorry, she's
Canadian.
She's Canadian. Does she live over here?
Yes, she's lived over here for the last 20 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because so to bring it like to my own story of being what happened to me in the DWP, there was a lot of foreign resources, shall we say, particularly America, and that was influencing policies, I think, over here. I can't say for that for absolutely certain. I'm pretty sure of it, probably about 99% sure of it. But
right.
Do you think there may be a conflict of interest, possibly, that she was drawing on resources that didn't apply to this country?
Yes. Let's not talk about Betsy because I haven't had the opportunity to interview her in my journalistic hat yet. Okay. But we've done pieces on her from the research done by Claire Best in America, who's an American documentary maker, just to put a bit of clarity on that. But what she's representing, what they're doing, the plan is well, is it a conflict of interest? The power femmes and the people in the media who support them, who get the message out, don't think it's a conflict of interests because they're doing the morally right thing. So they think that all of these ideas that have decimated America over the last 20, 30 years are really useful over here. And they're going to work with a British sensibility, which they're finding is a lot more febrile than they're expecting. Because when things go wrong, like I kind of claim that they have done for me, and there's many, many people who agree with me, then you start to actually talk back. And they're banking on that not happening. And do we want to import an entire justice system from kind of North America? So let's not even say it's Canada, but Canada do tend to be a bit more woke than America. But America, in terms of intellectual elite, is very woke as well. And it's those parts that we're importing here. And that's why they're always slamming Trump like they do. I don't have any support for Trump, but it's why they attack him in the way that they do. So we become into international political areas by doing this, which is a bit out of my remit. But you're quite right. Is there a conflict of interest? I reckon there probably definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like that's really not so impartial, is it?
No, it's not at all. And it's like, this is how to do it, guys. Have a go at this. And we just start to enact that. And people like Keir Starmer, he will go famously wherever the wind turns, because this is going to get more wrong uns banged away, And the fact is, bang up the wrong uns if that's the case, but don't extend that to absolutely every touched knee in the country,
Well, yeah, this is it. I mean, to compare getting your knee touched to what happened to Sarah is it's appalling. It's actually how does that serve in the interest of Sarah? How does that bring her justice? It doesn't. It cheapens it, surely.
Well, that's it exactly. We're dealing with the most to the core sort of problem of humanity, of the sensitivities between men and women, how to deal with that. And the fact is that there isn't one spectrum between the touch knee Boris and Sarah Everard thing here. There are two. There's intent and not intent. And the touch knee, Damien Green, people, politicians, they're not intending to actually hurt somebody. They're just using their power in a ridiculous way that somehow embarrasses them later on.
Right.
Wayne Couzens, David Carrick, characters, campaign rapists, as they are sometimes called. That's an entirely different thing. But they want to do harm to. They haven't had their mental health looked at appropriately as a policeman should. They're sort of trying to tackle that now, I see, in the Met. But it's an intent. So there's the intent and that's the non-intent. Those are two different spectrums. They're not the same thing.
No, I can't imagine they are. I mean, surely a good vetting process would have been needed anyway. But unfortunately, the reports coming out about the Metropolitan Police is not very favourable to the public, shall we say, just putting it politely. So going forward then, how are you you said previously about reopening cases at the time that Alison Saunders was in the position of power. How are you advocating for that at the moment through ETI and false allegations?
Alison doesn't often come up in conversation anymore at the moment. This is the first time I've talked to her about her in public like this, because it's now historical. And the problem with the media is that when things go back a little bit, they try to move on and forget about everything.
Yes.
But they forget about the fact. The thing is, she's only kind of enacting things that Keir did. And because Keir is still very public facing, and
just a little bit,
you know, anytime people talk about him in the sphere of sex, they talk about he let Jimmy Savile off. That's just the one case which is already that man wasn't tried. So there's many problematics about the Jimmy Savile case. It's so handy to hang it on Keir and say you didn't prosecute him, so you're a shit DPP.
There was a lot of people to blame in that situation. A lot of people.
Absolutely, and it's a showbiz story. I'm more interested in the people's story and the fact of Keir deciding to reverse the believe the innocent thing in order to get the women's votes. There's nothing wrong with getting the women's votes, but I'm sure that the women's votes you want to get are ones who are understanding that you don't want to demonize men at the same time.
Yeah.
But no one speaks like this because everyone's terrified of saying no to women, because it's a very difficult thing, according to Jordan Peterson. I guess we know what he means. Just the fact of telling the truth, and people not being offended by that, and just trying to see that you're trying to go to somewhere more healthy. Not sure where I was, but
I can't tell making it healthy because, well, serving justice, that's a healthy thing. That makes society run and function, and it should be predicated, in my own opinion, it should be predicated on evidence. Now, I know sexual assault, rape, things like that, it's very difficult to prove. Certainly male on female, that is quite difficult. So I can understand why they want to investigate it, because these things do go by the wayside. Do you think that this kind of overtly feminist push in the MOJ and in the police and this kind of Me Too-esque kind of movement, do you think that takes away from legitimate cases of people who have been subjected to sexual crimes?
I imagine it does. That kind of case don't come my way because it's usually the families of men who have been through something like I have, where the evidence has been ignored or it's been kind of sort of manipulated in a different kind of way. What you're referring to, I think, is everything being strung out into a people are able to use this kind of sexual allegations to make everything seem somehow important, when able to amplify it, basically. And the amplification is not necessary. It sells papers like that. If you just see sex or rape in a headline, people just gravitate towards it. It's the biggest one that will attract attention. So of course the editors are going to do that, and they don't realize they're harming society. Great. Well, they do realize that. They just don't care. They're completely amoral. And these institutions should be amoral. But at the moment it's going, is there the smoke without fire? Then there's definitely a fire. Well, no, there isn't, because the fire could be a one-night stand. It could be a divorce gone wrong. And these kind of things should all be looked at very carefully. Everyone's got a pal who, not everyone, but loads of people have a pal who's been accused by his wife, and then they're supporting him. And it almost always depends on who's closest to you, who you actually support. Even from people who are completely into believe the victims, when they suddenly have a son who goes through something like this, they become non-feminist all of a sudden. So stance taking is also a big problem in this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it certainly sounds like it. Well, have you got any with like go forward with ETI and false allegations? What kind of other things are you going to be doing with those projects now? Is there any kind of documentaries, interviews, any articles coming up at all? Anything like that?
Lots of exciting things. We've
Excellent.
just been in a big article in the Epoch Times, which perhaps you'll
Wonderful.
do us the honor of linking under this or something like that to have a read, that people can understand exactly what we're on about. We're trying to make ETI, empowering the innocent, much more about doing as opposed to talking, because the false allegations movement, false allegations forum, FAF we call it, is quite new, about a month old, 6 weeks old, and it's an amalgamation of all the false allegation organisations in Britain, falsely accused carers and teachers I mentioned, falsely accused support organisation, FASO, are huge. I'm on their board, and lots of the other ones, PPMI, Progressing Prisoners Maintaining Innocence. There's a lot of these that the public won't know, because oftentimes they've been too shy to come out. ETI is less shy to come out, and with false allegations watch, if we don't talk about this stuff, it's going to get worse. And I'm all about conflict resolution, which is infuriating to some, apparently, but it's still not infuriating to me, because much of these things can be solved by conflict resolution. But the police laugh at me when I say that. Journalists laugh at me. I'm like, well, they don't laugh in a horrible way. They're sort of, how's that going to work, Sean? Well, in lots of these cases where there isn't violence and they're known parties, conflict resolution could be used, and that could be the way forward for proper sophistication. But the police want to keep everyone apart and keep everything worse. And so that's actually what I'm ultimately going towards.
Okay, so like by the sound of it, so it's like conflict resolution would be coming together to kind of come to a happy medium on the situation. Would that be a good way to characterize it, or accurate?
Right. Yes, exactly. I mean,
Okay.
kind of after everyone sort of sobers up and some angry parts are put aside, you get the people, the complainant and defendant, and without the risk of being sent straight to prison, like will happen to a defendant. And these allegations can be historical, they can be all kinds of different things. But I mean, the point I'm trying to make is it's not about violence. When there's the violence involved, which, believe it or not, Anna, is quite rare, that stuff goes to the courts as it always has done. That's an assault or an allegation assault. And the thing is, that's a different thing from what I'm talking about, which is the non-intent spectrum, things which is sexual misadventure, which is often the case. Now, when it's not, when it's a problem and that conflict resolution can't deal with it, well, off you go to the courts for a trial. But to pop all that, apparently they're trying to do this with specialist rape courts, they've called it. So I think they're actually trying to do that with the Law Commission. I'm yet to see. They've got a consultation open until September, and I've written about this before, so they might be trying to do that. But the defendant needs to have an equal say as the complainant, and that's what they need to toss that believe the victim stuff. Keir Starmer says that isn't what it's ever been. They're all incorrect. Well, that isn't how the courts have been operating. They've been operating on that basis, so they need to make sure they stop operating on that basis. Okay,
well, it kind of like that sounds a different way, because obviously I was going through the employment tribunal. After the preliminary hearing, we got the court date, and so it was the September 2022 was the preliminary hearing, and then was allocated June 2023 for my trial. But we were offered another preliminary hearing, and in between the preliminary hearing, the second one, and the no, hang on a minute. Get confused there. The preliminary hearing, then we had what was called an ADR. Have you heard of that before? Sure. It's an alternative dispute resolution. So it's similar to mediation. Now, unfortunately, mine didn't work out that well because it ended up just being a secondary preliminary hearing. But then we agreed to have a settlement talk before going to court. And that's obviously how my outcome ended up being a settlement, not a win as such through the employment tribunal. So that sounds kind of similar. I think that's actually quite a healthy way to deal with it. you know, things like that, rather than going through the course, because it's stressful, as you well know. Going through a trial it's one hell of a thing. But yeah, definitely about conflict resolution. I mean, you know, I'm sure we'll have another chat again sometime. I'd like to hear more details, what like maybe you were doing with Dr. Norton and things like that when it comes to conflict resolution, because that'd be quite interesting to learn about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of after the Law Commission consultation ends in September, they're going to publish lots of ideas about what they've done. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is that they want to have the juryless trials, possibly in these specialist rape courts, with just the trained judges. The problem is that we know what this training means, and they're saying that the judges have to direct based on rape myths. But the rape myths are a very, very controversial thing. Without being presented as controversial, they're being taken as fact. But the actors behind, in the face of this, me, Dr. Norton, Mr. Stuart Wayton at the University of Abertay, Paula Wright, have come out to say that, hang on, these rape myths are just theoretical, put out there. And what they actually are, as far as I'm concerned, is they're kind of alleged sexual assault scenarios. So, and apparently the people that are in the juries they don't actually operate on the basis of rape myths, but the power firms are saying you do operate based on rape myths. No, we don't. So actually the juries are arguing with them and saying that isn't the reason that we found him not guilty. We found him not guilty because we don't think it was rape, and that's an unacceptable finding. So
okay, so it's changing definitions, maybe.
Yes, exactly, and we have to watch this closer, and that's what we're doing in ETOs. We're watching it more carefully, because when they act in the moral right, power firms, then they can just steamroll everything, and there's been enough steamrolling being done. So that's, you know, we're not doing this in a hostile way, we're doing it in an analytical, factual way. They don't like that very much, but you've got no choice, you have to.
No, crikey. But it sounds like, you know, that a to be continued kind of, you know, saga, really.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to end with this. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not important at all, and 10 being it's an absolute priority, would you say that the MOJ should prioritize impartiality?
9.999 out of 10.
Okay.
If that helps you have a stat, because there always has to be a bit of error in there, you know.
Yeah, you've always got to have a little bit of something.
It's utterly vital. It's utterly, this is Britain. We invented, you know, the best court system in the world, and people don't seem to realise that it's not that.
Yes, it's got its old face, but it's kind of like a new brain behind it, a very maybe ideological one.
That's a brilliant way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay, my darling. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm sure we'll do this again soon, certainly maybe later on in the year once all this has come out. I'll be interested to hear what you think of the new legislation, policies, documents, anything that's related to it. Look forward to
come back and talk. It kind of occurred halfway through our chat that the Impartial project, your new Impartial project, is very much reflective of the conflict resolution that I'm thinking about. You know, I'm always looking for solutions, not to wind other sides up. You know, I've never been like that, and I think there's a lot of. So it'd be a really good thing to come back and report back on any changes, good or bad, to you later on. I'd love it.
Yeah, excellent. You know, anytime, just pop me a message.
Fabulous.
Cool. Okay, right, my darling. Well, you take care, and I'll speak to you real soon. See you later. Bye. Hello, and thank you ever so much for joining us on the Impartial Project. If you're a current or former civil servant that has concerns or has a story you'd like to tell about the political activism in your department, then please do contact me on anna@theimpartialproject.org. Thank you.